All right, I think we're live. Push 1 in the chat if you can hear me. All right, got a confirmation. Thank you for the confirmation. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 807, Black Economics. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust. Also, there'll be a link in the chat for you to join the panel if you want to engage. It's a Zoom link. Make sure you update your Zoom client before joining. Let me put the link in the chat. We can get started. All right. Tonight's topic about reparations. I came across PBS clip the other day that was discussing reparations. And I thought it was interesting that we covered, Evanston, Illinois before, I think about a year or so ago. And, it's been brought back up. But what I find interesting is the discourse that happens in the clip itself. And I think people should pay attention to it because far too often we misplace blame and falsely accuse people of sandbagging reparations for Black people, when in reality, the real culprit, people don't want to call those people out. So what I'll do is I'll play the clip now. Let me get the clip ready. And then we'll give our analysis on this, and if nobody comes up, then we'll peel up out of here. All right, let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see the screen. Yeah, just put 1 in the chat if you can see the screen. All right, cool. Let's talk about it then.
Illinois passed the first reparations law in American history. It set out to address decades of segregation and legalized housing discrimination. Economics correspondent Paul Solman recently visited the Chicago suburb to follow up on the progress of the program. It's part of our ongoing series, Race Matters.
Evanston Hospital wouldn't accept Black mothers, so my father had to drive me to Cook County Hospital to be born. But as a baby, I came back to the house. My father bought the house in 1930.
88-year-old Lou Weathers' house in Evanston, Illinois, home to a long-standing Black community which comprises some 16% of the city's 75,000 inhabitants, some of whom, like Donna Walker, are still bitter about the past.
I am truly waiting for 40 acres and a mule. A jackass will be fine for me, but just give me some acreage and I'll be okay.
Evanston isn't offering the acreage, but given the persistent and huge wealth and health gaps ever since slavery, it is trying to make amends with a first-of-its-kind reparations project that's spreading.
We had an official side event at the United Nations last week sharing the motto, the growth, that it was Evanston in 2019, and today there are over 100 localities that have taken a first step towards reparations for their community.
Former City Councilor Robin Rue Simmons spearheaded reparations here in 2019. $10 million to be spent over 10 years, funded by taxes on newly legalized cannabis sales and by real estate transfers. So far, 16 recipients, $25,000 each.
I just figured the country would not approve nothing like that.
Lou Weathers wasn't just surprised.
Yeah. I was shocked.
Shocked.
Yeah.
Weathers used his $25,000 to reduce his son's mortgage here in Evanston.
Well, anytime you can reduce your mortgage, your mortgage payment is going to be lower. His bills are going to be lower. He can use the money for other things.
I had said it from the beginning that we were not going to see this money at all.
But hairdresser Donna Walker was wrong.
Some people did see it, and I'm very happy that they did. And I'm happy that the elders are able to, pay taxes on their home, fix it up.
Walker's next-door neighbor, fellow hairdresser Gigi Giles, is on the waiting list for funds that will come in future years. So you figure you will get it eventually?
Eventually, if not, my grandchildren or my daughters will get it.
What will you do with the money?
I would fix up my home. I would do my kitchen and my 2 bathrooms.
Can you do that for 25 grand?
I'd make it work.
Initially, reparations money only counted towards housing-related projects, mortgage payments, home improvements, or a down payment. In March, Evanston City Council added the option of direct cash payments because some had felt that a restricted grant was demeaning. Recipients should be able to do what they want with the $25,000.
Most of us here can't even afford to live here.
Like Donna Walker.
If you give me something, you can't tell me how to spend it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and it's like, you have people like, well, what are they going to spend it on? Man, I'm going to buy Newports and a Cadillac. Come on, really?
Newport cigarettes, that is. Lou Weathers, though, prefers housing investment.
Anytime you have grants and stuff like that, 2 sides have to get something out of it. The city making people improve their property helps me because I own property. That's going to increase my value of my property.
Now, not everyone in Evanston is pro-reparations, of course.
I don't think it's a good idea. There are people who need help. The help should not be predicated on someone's race, creed, color, orientation.
A local businessman who called us later trying to take back the interview. A bit late, but as a courtesy, no name or face.
We had laws that were against the Chinese, and those were enforced from around 1883 to 1943. So if we go by that standard, well, then we owe the Chinese recompense, we owe the Japanese even more recompense, and there comes a point where we're a flawed society. I think the thing we need to do is move forward.
Evanston Mayor Daniel Biss wasn't surprised to hear of the reluctance to say this on camera.
I do think people feel like if I come out and say reparations is a dumb idea, we should not do that, I'm just not going to make a lot of friends. I'm not going to gain a lot of support.
But reparations champion Simmons says taking a stand means ignoring the blowback, no matter how unpleasant it's been to see what she herself has received online.
It's the ghetto lottery or, you monkey, you slave, and go back to Africa, that type of stuff.
But the overall reaction, at least in this liberal city, according to the liberal mayor,
it's something that we're enormously proud of. I think it's an important step one might argue, a partial step or an inadequate step, but still a really important step toward both on a factual level, reckoning with our past, but also creating the concrete equity that our community has been talking about for probably 4 or 5 generations, but has never really fully realized.
Is the pride pervasive? I asked our camera-shy businessman. So if roughly half the population are white, what proportion of those people do you think don't think this is a good idea? Think as you do.
You don't even bring it up because people are afraid to really express their thoughts. So I wouldn't be able to give you an honest answer.
At nearby Northwestern University, Professor Al Tillery is studying the response to the Reparations Initiative.
We've so far gotten about, close to 4,000 respondents, people writing in.
So he doesn't have results yet. But although in nationwide polling, few whites are in favor,
I don't think we're going to be at the 15% for where white people are nationally. I think we're going to be much higher than that. Will we be over 50% with our white population? I don't know.
50%
in support,
approve.
and so who approve? Yeah, I mean, if we found between 30 and 50% approve, I think that would be like finding the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I mean, that nowhere else will it have been so high.
And so where does the program go from here?
So over the course of time, more revenue is going to come in both through the cannabis and also through the real estate transfer tax that'll allow more grants to be allocated. There's a long waiting list of ancestors. Behind them is a long waiting list of descendants. And behind them are a lot of other people in this community who were mistreated or whose ancestors were mistreated by the city government through policies the city government deliberately enacted, and we have a lot of work to do.
Just to deal with the 600 or so applicants thus far, especially, says the mayor, in a city now so pricey, many blacks can't afford to stay, like Dwayne Logan at Gigi Giles' salon.
I'm from Evanston, but I don't currently live in Evanston now because the taxes were so high that I had to buy a house in Skokie.
Right, says Simmons, because blacks were never able to build generational wealth, which is why she was inspired to push for reparations.
I was looking at the race gaps in every area. I was looking at the loss of black community, residents leaving almost every day because of lack of affordability, not feeling a sense of place, going to other communities where they felt more hopeful and opportunity. The black experience in this city and in this nation has been in a state of emergency since we were kidnapped from West Africa and brought here. And so it is time to do something radically different than we've done in the past, and reparations is that answer.
About time, says Gigi Giles.
People want to see money. Money talks. And then they probably would be happy, but, it is what it is. It's a start.
And she's still living here and running the business her father started 60 years ago. For the PBS NewsHour, Paul Salmon in Evanston, Illinois.
All right. So there you have it. 15% or less of white people support reparations. You heard the guy in the clip. The white guy in the clip was so embarrassed, he had to take it back, on his position because he didn't want to be seen. And so when people want to say, Democrats are against reparations, the Congressional Black Caucus, they're not doing anything about reparations, the NAACP, they're not doing anything about reparations, and the Urban League isn't doing anything about reparations. All these black institutions supposedly are not doing anything about reparations, but in reality, it's white folk go to the ballot, protest, in silence or in their own enclave, and work against the collective interests of black people. Okay. I know a lot of folks want to hold Jim Clyburn accountable, for reparations, but that's just not how it works. It doesn't work that way. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people in the manosphere who also push this sort of agenda as well. I won't call anybody's names out tonight, but, you've seen their content the last week or so talking about reparations and not even understanding how the system even works. Okay. We got Renaissance Man on the panel. What's going on, bro?
Hey, what's up, Mike?
Chilling, bro. What's going on?
No, not so much, not so much. Yeah, no, yeah, I saw this I guess sort of mini series on PBS NewsHour earlier in the week. I think maybe last week.
Yeah.
And the thing I found interesting was kind of like, the person they said who didn't feel comfortable going on camera, their comments coupled with, the professor at the end who was saying, that it'll be interesting to see where it lands. I think, obviously it'll be higher than the national average just because, that area is going to be a lot more liberal just because it's basically a suburb of Northwestern University. So, any sort of college town is going to be a little bit, or suburb of a college town is going to be a little bit more liberal than, obviously, or a lot more liberal than like somewhere like in the rural or somewhere in the Midwest. And then, maybe even more liberal than some of your bigger cities as well, too. But, the thing I always find interesting is you really sort of see people's racism and their bias towards Black people when you start, especially people who are white, when you start talking about ideas of reparations and just like that. Because I don't want to derail this, but I sort of go to, the whole Just Burley thing's dust up, and, her like trying to walk through and like try to explain, well, why she's against reparations. And I'm just like, when you hear these people, they really can't make an argument as to like a genuine argument that's really rooted in any sort of logic. They haven't done any of this study, and you just you really realize that, hey, these people, a lot of them are just extremely racist, or they very much are ingrained in sort of a white supremacist mentality where, Black people get anything, even if it's something that's justly due. It's trying to repair a harm that, the UN, I think any sort of independent body that you go and talk to would say is due. And you just see like, complete, like almost vehement anger from some people. They even suggest something like this. So, I always find it funny when people think that they're going to go to the right and get some idea that reparations is going to gain traction. And I've even heard on other platforms people trying to suggest well, we'll make a trade where if we say we're anti-immigration, they'll give us reparations. I'm like, where do you think people are going to make that trade? Like, what planet is that on, man? Like, these people are anti-immigration and anti-reparations, and they're not going to make that compromise. And in their mind, honestly, they think they can get anti-immigration they can get pro-anti-immigration policies passed without even talking or mentioning reparations. So the whole conversation that I hear online is just a lot of nonsense, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And these folks never ever read anything about reparations in terms of the history. They always seem to have this sort of give me the loot, I'm a bad man, like they're Biggie Smalls or something. It's just like, no, it's just not how it works.
Yeah, it's either that or it's, I hear people talking like, well, I'm not going to vote if I don't get reparations. And I'm just like, these people want to talk about, and they'll say, well, because Democrats haven't been doing anything for Black folks. I'm like, when you look at the right, abortion, the evangelicals voted together for what, 50 years to get that turned over. Nobody said, well, if you don't overturn Roe v. Wade in one term, we're not voting. Like, it's political ignorance. A lot of it's just political ignorance.
Yeah, and it seems to be a lot of pride in being politically ignorant, at least when it comes to Black men. I don't really see too many Black women really pushing that message. I see it more with Black men. More than anything, they seem to really gravitate towards, disinformation platforms, misinformation campaigns, anything that makes them feel good about themselves. No matter how false the information is, they'll gravitate towards it. And when you talk about reparations, they're always looking for the boogeyman that's in Black skin. But in reality, like we just heard from the clip, yeah, he's like, well, what about the Chinese? What about the Japanese? Well, we're not talking about them, okay? No one has a problem with Jews getting, reparations from Germany. Nobody has a problem with that. It's
Not at all.
only when it comes to Black people in America, they only seem to have a problem with it, man. And it's not like, there's no documented evidence of wrongdoing. Plenty of documented evidence of wrongdoing. The government, if you want to take the military into consideration, what about all those Black men coming from World War II that did not get their GI Bill?
GI Bill, redlining, just discrimination in general. I saw something recently. Obviously, we saw the whole Bruce's Beach situation where there was the family at least got the land given back to them. But I even saw this area of, I believe it's, is it Santa Monica, California, or Santa Cruz? One of the two, I can't remember. They used to call it I think Prop 14 or Area 14, but basically it was this Black and Hispanic area that they had built. People moving to California out in the, I want to say maybe the 30s. Basically trying to get away from Jim Crow, New Start, and basically they did not want these people in the town, and they basically ran them out of town, burned their homes to the ground, and forced them to move.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, these things we're literally finding out about these things. I mean, we know about Tulsa, but I mean, I remember 5 years ago, no one knew about Tulsa. I wouldn't say no one, but a lot of people didn't. It was sort of, people heard about it, and then it sort of caught some traction there as well too. Now most people know about it, but there's just all sorts of things that I'm sure that as time goes on, we get more and more research, we'll find out about more and more things that we don't even know that were basically cooked up to steal, to basically screw Black people over. That, I don't know if you saw it in the video, but there was another video of up there for 60 minutes about farmland. I saw that one as well too. That one popped up in my feed, and they went through a whole Shirley Sherrod and the whole situation of how Blacks were basically run off their land and basically forced to move when they had acquired tons of properties. So, this stuff runs deep. And like you said, you really only get that opposition when it comes to Black people and the claim that we have. You don't see that with a lot of other groups when they have a justice claim of some sort for repair.
Let me play this clip from former candidate running for office, Marcel Dixon. I think that it's apropos for this discussion. Let me play this from Newsmax.
See how we are still losing our land. Sometimes we're either forced to sell it, sometimes it's outright stolen, or we can't afford the taxes.
Well, that is Greg Marcel Dixon, who's running for Congress in South Carolina, challenging incumbent Democratic Representative Jim Clyburn in a primary. Dixon, who says he's a descendant of slaves, calling on President Biden to give qualifying Black Americans $2.8 million in reparations for the lasting effects of slavery. The motto and slogan of his campaign is Repair Black America to Fix America.
With us now, Greg Marcel Dixon, again, South Carolina congressional candidate. Sir, welcome, and thanks for coming on National Report today. Again, running a primary challenge to unseat Representative Jim Clyburn in your state here. Tell us why you think this is a winning message and why you think it actually has the chance of succeeding.
Well, one, the reason I ran against Clyburn, first of all, thank you for having me, is because he's been the congressman in my district for 31 years. And when I did my research, I found out that Clyburn's district, South Carolina District 6, which is still a majority Black district, even though it has dipped recently, is the 6th poorest district in the United States of America. But being that the majority of the district is Black, obviously, I need to meet the needs of the majority of constituents. But not just that, though. There has been several economic studies, not just the most recent one by Citigroup, that shows that one of the underlying causes of poverty and social inequities in the United States of America is its history of anti-Black racism that hurts not just Black Americans, but all people, even white people. And I'm trying to help people make the connection that if you are a true patriot, what hurts you hurts me, and what hurts me hurts you.
I wanted to bring this up. So there's the campaign, and we've seen a little bit about your website there, but you also tweeted out this, quote, Black Americans, hashtag Freedmen, have had 90% of our land stolen since 1910. South Carolina is ground zero for black and land theft. Land equals wealth. I will get us compensated for our stolen land as well as grow our land ownership. Hashtag Gullah, hashtag Geechee. But I also wanted to come up with this going farther than that in terms of reparations, something we brought up at the very top of this. And it's been a conversation that's come up in California, and now we're seeing it here in South Carolina with your campaign. You actually came up with a reparations formula, and we'll show it here. It says each descendant of an American freedman will receive a bond and perpetuity in the amount of $2.8 million. This will result in a minimum of $189,540 per year per descendant. Can you tell me how you came up with these figures? Let's start with that.
I did research on various economists and historians that have calculated. We can't calculate, unfortunately, the emotional, mental trauma that Black Americans continue to experience. They have done very little studies on it, but there are studies there. They've done study on Holocaust survivors and Holocaust survivors' descendants and have shown that they show more trauma than Jewish people who are not Holocaust survivors. And that lasted for like a decade. So you can just imagine the trauma that Black Americans have inherited from centuries of government-sanctioned anti-Black racism. But it's hard to calculate mental emotional trauma. You can calculate land that's been stolen. You can calculate the fact that at the end of the Civil War, when slavery ended, the value of all Black people who unfortunately the bodies had a price tag attached to it will be worth in today's dollars between 48 to 82 trillion dollars. You can calculate the lost opportunities from Black Wall Streets that were destroyed, or the Federal Housing Authority that received a memo from the government to put highways and railroads through Black neighborhoods. Those things can be calculated.
A lot
came up with our own formula.
Limited with time, so I don't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to get to this very specific point. A lot of facts in there, so love to fact check some of that was brought up. But what I wanted to get to is $2.8 million. Where do you believe that money is going to come from?
It will come from the federal government, just like the funding for Ukraine has come from the federal government. The funding for the PPP loans came from the federal government. The funding for these COVID-19 vaccines came from the federal government. The funding for the wars that have been fought. The funding to bail out the banks.
Right, but Mr. Dixon, really quickly here, that you are correct. That money that you're talking about comes from the federal government. They get that money from taxpayers. There are many taxpayers, many that had nothing to do with slavery. You believe that everyone should be paying tax-paying money to go towards reparations of $2.8 million. Is that your stance?
Number one, that money will not come from tax revenue. If anyone knows the basics of how it works from the federal government level, the federal government does not depend on tax revenue to fund the federal government. States do, not the federal government. That's number one. But number two, even if it did come from tax revenue, which it will not, think about all the times Black Americans were denied their rights, but our tax revenue, if I accept what you're saying as the truth, went to programs that Black Americans were not able to benefit from and which we had nothing to do with, such as paying reparations to the Japanese Americans who were interned when we helped to stop.
So where do federal taxes go to? When you work in your job, you do know that taxes come from your paycheck, state and federal. Where is that money going?
The federal government does collect taxes, but it's mainly as an incentive that helps stimulate the economy, to get people to participate in the economy. Okay. The federal government tax revenue in reality really functions as a supplement to the money that the federal government can generate as a monetary sovereign. A monetary sovereign, as said by Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan, who were chairs of the Federal Reserve, that the United States government can generate as much revenue as it needs. The main limit is inflation, not a limit to what they can generate based on tax revenue.
We got to stop it there. We're out of time. I know your website's got all your information. And of course, again, facing off against Jim Clyburn. So running in a primary against a well-known congressman. So we'll keep an eye on your campaign. Greg Marcel Dixon, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all for having me. Take care.
All right, take care.
And I want to say this. I think that he has, I think his heart is in the right place, but I also think his brain is in the wrong place. I don't think he quite understands that that's not how reparations works. You know, one person doesn't move the needle on reparations like that. So even if he did beat Jim Clyburn, you still need a Senate majority to actually get reparations through. Okay. And as it stands, you don't have that. You don't have that because Black men don't vote, at least not at the levels that are necessary to move the needle. Especially in a place like South Carolina. You know, a lot of Black men staying at home. You know, you can't be politically, you know, you can't stay home when it's convenient for you, but then come out because you think you're going to get reparations because one person was elected to office. It just doesn't work that way. You need, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, and the other thing is you're kind of undermining your cause because Jim Clyburn has a lot of seniority. He's one of the most senior members in the Congress. You know, that means committee assignments, just in general relationships with people, ability to influence in the party. It's probably not the smartest idea to try to take that person out for someone who's going to be a freshman congressman and really have not much influence in the Congress at all. Like, I mean, when you look at someone like an AOC, you know, everybody really talks about her. I mean, AOC, she has a large political profile, but as far as like, you know, actual influence, like what she's actually able to get done in legislation, it's way overblown in the media and things like that, coupled with just in general, versus when you look at someone who's more seasoned, like a Hakeem Jeffries, you know, a Nancy Pelosi, a Jim Clyburn, you know, those people, for all intents and purposes, you know, they have a lot of sway, a lot of ability to whip votes. And that's what people sort of miss in all this, is that it's not necessarily the best idea to go take those people out unless you absolutely have to. It make a lot more sense to try to work with them, coupled with you're gonna have to vote you're gonna have to vote in every election pretty much. Like you can't just vote in the presidential election. You've got to vote, you know, every election cycle because, you know, the House is up every 2 years for a new vote. Same thing with the Senate is every 6 years. So this idea that you're just going to do this once or you're going to put one person in office, it's like I said, it just shows ignorance of the political process. And I you know, for people who say they want these things, it's kind of disappointing to see that some people really haven't done the research to really go look at, you know, what it would really take to get something like this passed. And it's going to be a lot more extensive than people want to admit. You know, a lot of these people are just trying to weaponize this, I think, for their own political gain.
Because you still have to govern, right? Reparations, you know, getting into Congress or getting into the Senate, it doesn't start and stop at reparations. That's just not how, you know, political positions work. You don't just get into one role and then think, well, I'm just going to govern on this and then that's going to be the rest, you know, that's going to be the end of it. It's not how it works. There are probably 100 bills a year that you're going to have to go through that are going to have to be co-signed or proposed or yay or nay on. It just doesn't work on, you know, today's Monday and where's the reparations bill? Okay. And then after that, you know, after they vote yay on it, you know, you just go home and then your job is done. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, you got to continue to have a functioning government. You got to continue to deal with issues. You got to continue to bring, you know, bring projects back and money back to your district, because that's part of the reason people get elected as well. And that kind of goes back to seniority. You know, more people, you can cut more deals, get on more committees, bring things back for your district. But, you know, like I said, a lot of these people, some of these people, like I said, are just using this as a political tool to I think some are using it to try to, basically destroy voter turnout for Democrats, basically use it as a wedge issue, fake wedge issue. I think some are just trying to use it to get into office. And then unfortunately, I think some are just like completely ignorant of the process, where they literally think it's just like, like they run up Jim Clyburn and said, oh, reparations, cut the check. Like, hey, I'm going to go to Congress. They're going to go cut the check and get into Congress, put a reparations bill. It's going to pass. And then, they're just going to, go cut the check, a couple days later. And it'll be in the mail, like, checks like Trump sent for stimulus. Like, it's just, it doesn't work like that, man.
No, it doesn't. He even said it himself, it will come from the federal government. But if you don't have enough seats in the Senate, then how's that going to work? It's just, unfortunately, this thing has spread like wildfire in the Black community, where people can, they can make up their own perspective on what they think politics is, or how they think the government actually works, or how they think the country actually functions. They don't get it. They just think that everything works because they can, come up with their own ideas, but they don't actually have a real perspective because they never had to govern on anything before. They've never been responsible for anything bigger than them. And so, and so that's their perspective on life. And I find that anybody who tries to get into a leadership position and they are completely unread, they are extremely dangerous people.
Yeah.
Dangerous people. Donald Trump, unread, in the leadership position, almost destroyed the country. Ronald Reagan, another yo-yo,
wow.
Another yo-yo in office, get into a leadership position, damn near.
George Bush.
Yeah, George Bush, another one. Any of these people who don't read, especially American history for that matter, they're very dangerous.
Yeah.
And you put a Black man in the same position, you're going to get the same outcome. A lot of guys who have not read or have not gone through the the proper pathways to leadership, whether it's going through I know the Black Panther Party, or I shouldn't say the Black Panther Party, but the Civil Rights Movement created a lot of politicians after that. And so they had a better understanding of what they were going up against. But what you have today are Black men who have never actually been involved in any sort of movement, haven't read any actual history, haven't read any books for that matter, and think that they can just go up in there and just strong arm everything in a congressional seat or a alderman seat or something like that. They think that they can just strong arm their way through office, and it doesn't work like that.
Nah.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to quickly say, with the whole civil rights movement, and you said Black Panther Party is, a lot of the civil rights movement, a lot of that was started with the student movement, coupled with, Black Panthers had a reading list. You can actually still find it online today. So, these were people who were very much intellectually based versus, this reparations thing. The ironic thing is, too, you've had groups like In Cobra, you've had people like John Conyers going all the way back to the 70s. Like, you even had Ta-Nehisi Coates that in 2014, that's what ignited reignited the reparations debate in the mainstream. But even then, these guys were not talking about this. Reparations is something that is literally, in a lot of these people's mind, it didn't exist until ADOS was created. That was probably around 2016, 17, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just it just kind of shows the fact that this went from something that nobody was talking about to now all of a sudden it's the most talked about issue in a matter of 4 or 5 years, and it's like people have been doing this stuff for decades. James Clyburn said that. The bill. He's like, the bill's older than my grandson. Like, come on, what are you guys talking about here?
Yeah, and pretty much that's what Black men are thirsting for. Especially with this ADOS thing, right? Like, there's a lot of guys, especially in this space, who hold on to ADOS without actually understanding the purpose of ADOS as an acronym and as a movement. It has nothing to do like somebody said the other day, what about ADOS culture? What does that mean? What does that really mean? Like, it doesn't have any, sort of grounding at all. It's just, I'm going to use this acronym and I'm going to bludgeon you with every opportunity with this acronym, even if it has nothing to do with what, with the subject matter itself. It's just, I find it to be unbelievable, but you have to hear it for yourself. Because I don't really hear Black women talking like that. I hear a lot of Black men talking like that. It's just, and the thing, libraries, man, still exist. You can actually go in there and go take out a book. Well, let's play this clip. Renaissance posted this. I think that this will be the last clip we play for tonight, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, yeah, it's a little bit longer, but I think it's well worthwhile.
And of course we do. That's why they love this land and they hold on to it. They want to pass it to them.
In 1865, the U.S. government promised newly freed Black Americans 40 acres and a mule, providing an opportunity for them to build wealth and independence.
Land has always been about freedom, political freedom, physical freedom, economic freedom.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
But that promise was broken again and again and again.
Black farmers and other Black landowners have repeatedly been targeted to have their property taken.
Do you think that you would have been that much further ahead if you were one of your white counterparts?
Oh, yes. We would not have lost the land. We would have gotten the loans and the services that all farmers should get through the government.
While some are rediscovering hope in collective action.
We cannot beg other people to give us anything, and that's what freedom is about, the freedom to manifest what we know we deserve.
For others, the struggle continues.
You got to fight for your land. You got to fight to keep it. Daddy had lived a good life, up north when he was in Massachusetts. But there was something here that brought him back. And I know it's that desire to farm, the quietness. It's a wonderful place to raise your children, and it still is. My father wouldn't have ever thought that I would come back here and do any farming. He wouldn't have thought anybody would come back, especially me. So you never know. You can't say, well, none of the children are going to come back, so, we might as well sell it. Same thing with even the old tractors. One of the tractors is 80 years old. Dad could have very easily said, well, I'm going to get rid of these tractors. Nobody's ever going to use them again. But here we are, farming with those same old tractors.
Veteran and retired teacher Mark Smith lives with his wife Janet on the land his family has owned since 1926. Mark's grandfather, a sharecropper, had traded his cotton harvest for these 600 acres during the height of the Jim Crow era.
This is my grandmother, and that's she and Papa right there. Those are the ones who bought this house, bought this property.
And this is your family. This is what came from that.
Right. These are the children and everybody that came from that. This is out in front of the house. This is Daddy, my mother, and all of the children. They were all very successful people. And I know where it comes from. It comes from this land. So, we do everything we can to protect that and hold on to it. Don't sell it, don't give it away, don't let anybody take it.
Land equals freedom in so many ways. Historically, land equaled freedom in the sense that there was physical space, a separation between Black people and people who oppressed them. And then being able to use your own expertise to produce resources for your family and be economically independent, that created freedom. People really don't understand the importance of the Black farmer in the African American experience. The Black churches were often on land that had been given by a Black farmer, or the Black schools were located on land that a Black farmer had provided.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
Because enslaved Africans could not own property, it wasn't until 1865 that Black Americans were able to formally request land from the government. But the opportunity only arose after a massacre of newly freed people at the hands of Union General Jefferson C. Davis during the Civil War. In December 1864, Davis took an opportunity to shed himself of the freed people, following his troops to safety at Ebenezer Creek. He got his soldiers across the creek using pontoon bridges, but stranded the freed women, children, and elderly on the other side, despite a Confederate cavalry following close behind.
The best figure that we can come up with is that hundreds of people apparently drowned in the creek trying to get across. In other words, they chose death over slavery. The eyewitnesses that saw what happened at the creek were absolutely horrified. And so it becomes this huge public relations disaster for the Lincoln administration. Here is, again, an army that's supposed to be liberating people, and it's causing the deaths of hundreds of people. So when Sherman takes Savannah in mid-December of 1864, Secretary of War Stanton ends up coming to Savannah, both to investigate what happened at Ebenezer Creek, but then also to figure out what are we going to do with all of these thousands of Black people in the coastal area of Georgia that are now free. So on January the 12th, 1865, that evening, there was a meeting held at Sherman's headquarters, and there were 20 African-American leaders that were invited. Now, all 20 of these African-American leaders were either Black ministers or Black lay leaders.
67-year-old freedman Garrison Frazier, a Baptist minister, acted as the church leader's spokesperson. When asked what the freedmen needed to take care of themselves and maintain their freedom, Frazier replied, "The way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor." 4 days later, General William T. Sherman issued Special Field Order No. 15, which confiscated 400,000 acres of Confederate land and distributed it to freed people in 40-acre parcels. Later, the Army provided some of them with mules.
The idea was to respond to that need for land, respond for that need for economic independence and self-sufficiency, with the idea that eventually they would be able to sustain themselves.
But less than a year after the special order was issued, President Andrew Johnson returned most of the land back to its previous white owners. This is what became known as the broken promise of 40 acres and a mule.
I think this idea of 40 acres and a mule centralized the agrarian traditions of African-American people within the rural South, within the Black Belt. And land, of course, was central to that and central to their economic independence. But it also was the beginning of missed opportunities and unfulfilled promises.
So guys, thank you for coming, and everybody.
Thank you guys for all you are doing.
No, it's every one of us.
It takes a team.
You put that sign in front of your house and you speak up, you know what, you're just as powerful as anything else.
Yeah.
In April 2022, a private railroad company sent letters to the Smiths and other residents of their predominantly Black neighborhood, asking to purchase some of their property. The company has plans to construct a railroad to transport building materials and timber. Around 3/4 of a mile of track would cut through the middle of the Smiths family's property and would sit about 700 yards behind Mark and Janet's house. After the Smiths refused to sell, the company petitioned for eminent domain, a legal practice the government or a private utility can use to seize private citizens' land for just compensation if it's for the public good. The Sandersville Railroad Company claims that the railroad would annually generate at least $1.5 million for the county.
You can see where the markers are and where the train came up through, where it's to come this way,
right,
and go across. We're on my nephew's property right now.
Right.
We're my nephew's. It's going to cross his, and then it's going to cross my brother Williams, because he has three tracks here. He's going to go across all 3 of his pieces.
Mm-hmm. In terms of distance, length, what are we talking about here?
It's pretty wide. It's pretty wide. And that's an issue, but that's not the only issue. What about your grandkids and kids and things? They come back here, you got to train, you know? What about people on the train? I mean, just all kinds of reasons we don't want it here. Environmental problem, noise.
Derailment.
Derailment, fires,
Right.
you know, toxic waste. What about waste? What are you going to bring through here? You're going to be bringing in kind of chemicals? And then on top of that, all of this, the value of it, it plummets. You know, it's not worth what it was.
Our sons will inherit something with somebody else's name on it because it's a
forever.
lifetime.
It's forever.
It's forever.
We want to keep our property clean and clear, just like it's been for the last 97 years with us. And we're going to fight to keep it that way.
The Sandersville Railroad Company says the new track would be used for one round-trip train per day that travels at 20 miles per hour to minimize noise. The company also says it complies with all state and federal environmental guidelines. Land ownership is a crucial tool for wealth building and independence, both of which Black Americans have struggled to attain since being transported to the U.S. against their will centuries ago. The total area of Black-owned farmland peaked over 100 years ago at 16 million acres, but has since plummeted more than 70%, totaling an estimated loss of $326 billion.
Black Americans have been the target of vitriolic racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired their ownership in the land. Some of that manifested itself in extra-legal violence. A substantial number of Black Americans who were lynched were actually upwardly mobile African Americans, both socially and economically. In addition to the extra-legal, there's been any number of technically legal ways in which Black Americans have lost land.
Historically, urban renewal and eminent domain have separated hundreds of thousands of African Americans from their property.
Redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders denying loans to people based on their race or where they live. The promise of aid that fails to materialize is all too familiar to many farmers of color, long subjected to discrimination in government programs.
In the case of Black farmers, the whole process of getting a loan approved was just awful. You had people who were supposed to help you, and these government agencies who didn't and worked against you. In some cases, land would get targeted, and they would help make sure you were not successful and lose it. My father was murdered by a white farmer who was not prosecuted. I made a commitment on the night of my father's death to stay in the South, which was not what I intended to do, to stay in the South and devote my life to working for change.
In 1969, civil rights activists Shirley Sherrod and her husband Charles founded New Communities, one of the first community land trusts in the country.
We decided that Black people had lost land so much through the years, we wanted to develop a way of not losing the land. So the land would be held in trust, which meant we would all own it. But then the opposition from white people, you know, there were times they would shoot at the buildings. They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
To intimidate you.
Yes, we had a pretty big farming operation going until we ran into droughts in the 70s. So it forced us to go to the local USDA office to try to get an emergency loan like all farmers were getting. The guy said, "You'll get a loan here over my dead body."
Really?
Yes. Put us into a 3-year fight just to try to get a loan with continued drought. and not having the money needed to operate the farm in the way that it should have been operated.
So essentially you all were squeezed out of ownership.
Yes, there were programs that they should have been offering us, which would have given us a chance to save everything.
Several reports published between 1965 and 1997 from both federal civil rights committees and a commission group confirmed the USDA has consistently failed to provide black farmers equal access to loans.
Not surprising, Black Americans who were farmers began calling the USDA decades ago the last plantation. And Black farmers have been saying for the longest time that they were being denied loans that they were totally qualified for.
The nation's African-American farmers are stepping up pressure on federal agricultural officials to end what they say is racism by the government.
In 1997, Timothy Pigford and 400 fellow black farmer plaintiffs filed a class action lawsuit against the USDA. Known as Pigford v. Glickman, it alleged the USDA discriminated against black farmers in its allocation of loans.
We have not done enough. I accept that. We need to pay reparations for documented cases of past discrimination.
In settling the Pigford cases, there was a process set up where individual black farmers had to make their case. Initially, a lot of the farmers were left out of the settlement because of just incredibly poor notice. But you ultimately did have actually 2 rounds of Pigford.
Pigford 1 and 2 settlements added up to more than $2 billion. New Communities members received $13 million, which was used to revive their operation decades after its foreclosure.
It's 1,638 acres. This place was once owned by the largest slave owner and the wealthiest man in Georgia at that time in the 1800s. Now we started planning and looking at how we could take a place that had a bad beginning in terms of slavery and use that to work with our people. And that's what we're busy doing.
While the Sherrods were able to regain what they'd lost, for the other estimated 30,000 plus approved claimants, most received $50,000.
Pigford is not nothing, but the notion that it's reparations, upon closer examination, just doesn't hold water. An economic estimate of the farmland black farmers lost between 1920 and 1997, $326 billion. So when you compare $2 billion from Pigford, that was sold as reparations, was sold as making people whole, and you compare it to the level of harm, it's obviously the level of harm is orders of magnitude higher.
A recent analysis found that the USDA provided a disproportionately low share of direct loans to black farmers in 2022. But the department is making efforts to close that gap. In 2022, the Biden administration launched the USDA's Equity Commission, on which Shirley Sherrod serves as a member. $2.2 billion have also been earmarked for farmers who have faced discrimination before 2021, but the funds have yet to be released.
This is our Independence Day, amen? All right.
Black Americans are still finding ways to build generational wealth and create safe havens for their communities, in the same spirit as the Sherrod's Community Land Trust and the black settlements that have developed throughout history.
For us, it's this idea of kuji chakalia, self-determination. This idea that as people from and a part of the African diaspora have a responsibility to make our world a better place. And we cannot wait for other people to do it. We cannot beg other people to give us anything. And that's what freedom is about, the freedom to manifest what we know we deserve.
Ashley Scott, along with Renee Walters and Laura Riley Cooper, are founding members of what started as a collective of 19 black families that bought 500 acres of land together. They are now building a whole new town called Freedom, Georgia.
On our own 502 acres to be celebrating Juneteenth, to see the children, to see the elders, to see all of these people have traveled far and wide to be here, it feels amazing. It feels like freedom. It feels like healing. It feels like love to watch my children play on the dirt, on land that we own, and that our ancestors, you know, prayed for us to be able to have this kind of experience. It means everything. Watch your toes. Collective ownership is powerful. Our ancestors practiced it. So it's almost as if we're tapping into those same successful energies that allowed our ancestors to prosper. And my children are tapping into that energy.
It's important because it creates generational wealth, something that didn't seem obtainable for us as Black people. And it's just a way for us to leave something for our children, like build a legacy and just have something like wealth for our children. 3 years ago, I didn't think that I would have 500 acres. So the average person doesn't really think that it's obtainable until you see other people, other regular people going out and buying land. We want to inspire all the Black people that we can. Go get you some land and build wealth for your family.
I understand this thing about generational wealth, generational properties. I know that through the years, we did not have the opportunities to get real estate. It was not available to us. Even today, even what's happening right now with this trying to grab our land. You see, this has happened to a lot of people, and it's happened through all the years. And that is the reason that so many Black people suffer now in poverty.
I feel that no one owes me anything. I serve a powerful God, a powerful Jesus. I've not suffered. In fact, I am humbled. And I've taught my sons the same thing. I said, God is the great equivocator. If you're looking over your shoulder and you're looking for something, you're not going to find it and you're not going to get it that way. You look ahead.
We got Complex Design on the panel. What's going on, bro?
Hey, Mike, you hear me okay, Ben?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hey, man, this is right on the heels of what it is that, you know, Rael and I covered last night. Sunday night. Yeah, Sunday night. With regards to Booker T. And, you know, this is what took place after that era. So this is a really powerful live stream you guys got going on right here. I could even speak to some of the same type of circumstances a lot of these people have been experiencing. You know, both sides of my family, we still have land that's been held for a very long time. And there were various times throughout the years where it was a lot of red tape, bureaucracy. You know, a lot of just shit, especially if there's something on the land, like oil or gas or water, timber, stuff like that. You know, there's always just been this record that, you know, Black landowners have had just a hell of a time, you know, getting access to capital and then being able to not only then develop the land, but then bring those products from that land into the marketplace.
Renaissance man.
Is Ren there?
All right, I think he stepped away. But, you know,
okay.
Again, so the title of this stream tonight is Who's Against Reparations, right? And a lot of times, like we heard earlier before the 60-minute clip, you had a Marcel Dixon in South Carolina running against Jim Clyburn talking about he's going to bring reparations back. And the thing here is reparations isn't a one person deal. It's not something that happens by one person. It's something that happens by, a collective of people, just like the clip said, And so I just wish in this space of Black males that they would understand the magnitude of what you're dealing with. And there's so many of them who don't seem to really grasp this. They don't really seem to have a good historic grounding as to what happened before and how they actually were able to, what was the lived experience of Black people in that day. They don't seem to really have that, and they don't even seem to care. To be quite frank, they don't seem to care. They seem to really push their own narrative, and they think that they can actually achieve something by going, behind the wall, and having these sort of mysterious conversations about American history. And it's just like, no, that's just not how it works. That's just not true. And so,
well, I was going to say, you even had those people that were in that video. They've had the land for 90 plus years, and what they're now trying to do is fight from having the damn rail constructed through the property. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like that.
Which is going
like,
to drive the property value down.
What was that, Ren?
Which they said in the clip will drive the property value down, as well as create a bunch of other nuisances for them.
A whole host of, what would you even want the property for at that point? And that's the type of like holdover systemic issues that Black landowners, and like you said, these people have that land and they've had it like 90 plus years. Like the land that, on my mom's side of the family, we had it over 100 years. And let me tell you something, it's a hell, you have a battle if you're really trying to do something with it, and you're trying to get access to capital and entryway into industry and markets and stuff like that. It's a struggle. It really is.
Well, let me ask Renaissance something. Did you hear a matriarch or a gynocracy in any of that?
You know what, Mike? That was another thing I noticed. I didn't hear anything about that.
I mean, yeah. If you let the intelligentsia of the manosphere tell you, the gynocracy, the matriarchy, the Bilderberg, they had
what's the other ones? Illuminati.
Yeah. I mean, you would think that this was historic, that, Black women just ran the community and, they just ran society. Railroads going through, Black women, they stopped this, they stopped the railroad from coming in here. They just ran the community the way they ran it. I don't know.
Yeah. Mike, one thing that I wanted to point out, you were talking about just people not understanding. This is one of my big problems with ADOS is, if you go back to 2016, they were saying, hey, okay, don't vote on the federal level, like leave the presidential box empty. And I was like, if you know anything about how the government works, the head of the USDA and the Department of Agriculture, that's going to be appointed by the president. And one of the big issues with Biden, when he was elected, a lot of people wanted him to appoint Marsha Fudge because she was really going to focus on this equity piece and the historic discrimination and basically the agribusiness lobby, as well as, more moderate people tried to claim that, she didn't have the experience and this and that. And they ended up appointing Tom Vilsack again to the position, which he had served in previously. And that has a direct impact. As they said, Black farmers have long said that the USDA is the last plantation. So these things have real consequences. And that's what's really frustrating with these people is that, they almost have this like bumper sticker type of mentality as far as how politics goes. And they just really don't understand the people who have to deal with like the fallout from this, the people who, like they said, lost their farms. Shirley Sherrod, she, if you remember during the Obama administration, they tried to get her fired because of her telling a story, Fox News taking something way out of context. luckily she was able to, get her collective of her husband back together. But as she said, and as I said in the clip, you still got other people who only got $50,000 out of this, which is nothing. You even had, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, you had some Black farmers who literally a seed company sold them like $50,000 to $100,000 in faulty seeds. And they had to go to like one of the university labs to prove it. And they were trying to sue the seed company. So this is a lot of the stuff that goes on that, people don't really talk about, don't really hear about. But as they talked about in the clip, farmland is one of the most instrumental things that you can have, because you can literally take it and use it to produce resources through your own expertise and then turn around and sell those resources. So, I mean, it's the basis of independence. And it's really frustrating when a lot of people either ignore this or don't understand it and don't care to understand it.
Bingo.
Yeah. And you have to look at raw land as, raw land is also a big part of investments where you buy raw land and you hold it, and then you either build on it, subdivide it, and you make huge profit that way as well. That's another massive way of getting rich. And that's just a part of your economic system. And even when I was a broker, when I was back in the brokerage days, you had many what they called investment strategies that were kind of standard, that were taught to people in the industry. And, buying raw land and these kind of things were part of that strategy. So that's always been a big part of building. Farmland, another very powerful wealth builder. And that's why, a lot of Black people were taken from their lands or cheated out of it and so forth. And during the 70s and 80s, you actually had a group of Black landowners who were trying to save many Black homesteads back in the 80s, 70s and 80s that were losing their land at record rates because of people who had this generational land and then were being basically swindled or being negotiated, if you will, out of it. And this has been going on a very long time. This is what the system on the whole doesn't really want you to have a lot of, because then that means you control a lot of America. If you control land, you've got a very strong stake in here. When we look at all of what we want to call systemic racism or whatever, the name of the game was to see to it that you didn't have land or have home ownership. And if you did, then there was some way of kind of swindling you out of it. So where we see people losing land, we also saw the same thing happen to many Black people during, the housing crash, where they lost a lot of, their homes then. And many of those houses were taken illegally. And what did they do? Gave them $10,000 cash for their swindled homes that they lost basically illegally. Didn't get the land back, but gave them 10 grand. Where here with their land, they gave them 50. Same business model, if you will. So we should be looking at these things. We don't look at them, but we talk about these girls and all that, these women and all that craziness. But we're not looking at, the real systemic aspect of what's really going on here with us in this community and wealth building. We don't get into this hardly at all. But
or the fact that right now people like Bill Gates are your biggest farmland purchasers.
That's right.
So kind of maybe even speaks to more of that sentiment that you're saying, that there's value in farmland. No, yeah.
I mean, it's where it is. It's the bottom line of what this thing is about. But nobody talks about this at the level that we should, because people are just not on. They're just not on it. They're not talking realistically about what our real issues are, which is real wealth and and really holding a stake in this country, and that's having this land, and how you've lost a lot of it. How there are those who are trying to keep you from getting it, and those who've been swindled out of it heavily. But yet people are talking about other things that are just not that significant. So it just lets you know where things are coming from. I really enjoy coming to the Brain Trust and listening to subjects like this that are so critical to what, to what's really important to us, and how so few people really want to listen or really take heed, which is also, disturbing at another level, but it's very typical of what is going on with us in our community these days, especially.
Yeah, and one more thing I wanted to add too, with the clip, they were talking about a railroad track being run through their land, but the urban equivalent of this has been, freeways being run through Black communities in big cities. So whether it's large tracts of farmland or people just trying to own their homes and own the neighborhood, you've seen this repeated issue of big industry wanting to come basically build through. And just disrupt the community or people's property. And there are tons of stories around America that we've covered here as well about how this has happened in a more urban setting with the freeways and highway systems.
Well, Ren, I was going to say, I think Mike, I think just recently we actually talked about that, right? The carbon imprint in urban areas. Like that was literally just maybe a few weeks ago or something.
Yeah, I think we were talking about climate impact.
Was it micromobility?
No, climate impact. It was climate impact. Yeah, because you had it was about climate tech. The lack of Black people's place in the climate tech industry relative to their impact of climate disposition, right? They're disenfranchised by, climate issues such as pollution and
the stuff you were just saying, Ren. Yeah,
heat, right?
Stuff
and
you were literally just saying.
I mean, the same thing happened with trucking, right? A lot of times your freight would be moved, maybe not by rail, but by 18-wheelers through a lot of Black neighborhoods where they roll coal, those smokestacks on those big rigs, and so that went on, but that doesn't happen up here anymore, primarily because they have scheduled times as to when you can actually run that rig or those rigs through the neighborhoods, or even now they have last mile resorts, right? You have more clean, compressed natural gas based trucks that come through the neighborhoods now. They don't really use that anymore. So,
yeah, but I was thinking about last thing I was going to say in New York, there was a guy who was hired by the state. His name was Robert Moses. You guys might have heard of him. Who basically just ran all kind of urban development, if you will, and highways and so forth through many neighborhoods, and eliminated Black neighborhoods specifically. I mean, he did other neighborhoods as well, but he certainly went to town when it came to Black people, specifically in New York.
And to go on, I heard he even I heard he built a bridge so low that buses could not go under it, so they could never have public transit in certain places. That's how how much he was focused on keeping public transit out, which essentially is time to Black folks.
Yeah, and basically isolating your community, where not only were you redlined, but literally physically redlined, in many ways. So you had that going on in the city and certainly throughout the state, but certainly New York City, supposed to be this grand metropolis, Gotham, and they were removing you in that way, or isolating you. So this is something that's been a practice enterprise-wide throughout the United States, everywhere. And for those Black people, all of us who have fought to keep our lands and so forth, it's been a battle. It has been a battle, and that's why such a very critical clip that was played, that you just played. I've seen it before, but seeing it played here again is very critical. That should be standard watching for people, quite frankly, so we can really understand what's really going on. Keep your heads clear, and when you start truly talking about conservatism, when you really start talking about it, take a look at what that film is talking about and conserving your lands and what what you're really going up against and what really true Black conservatism in so many respects is literally all about with respect to your land. And you'll come away from a different type of mindset than what some of the stuff you're hearing from some of these others. But very, very, very excellent clip being played. Very, very, very excellent stuff played here tonight on this on the Black Brain Trust. Always proud to come into this channel and on the station and sit down and talk about very critical things. Very proud to be here.
Yeah,
Thank you, bro.
along with the expansion of the highway, that's why they never expanded I-55, I-57, I-69. They could clearly go through Black areas. They did it on purpose, so that way they wouldn't have to build infrastructure, and they would rather just leave all of that land. Like from Memphis to the Delta is probably like 180 miles of jack shit. That stuff could have easily been a highway all the way down through Mississippi. No, they just let it be state highways, so that way they wouldn't have to have infrastructure around it. And there could have easily been some areas that Black people could have moved to. But people don't understand that every time that you get a concession out of your government, it's still called reparations. Like, reparations isn't a check. Reparations is actual capital investment. It's 1,000 different things, just like tax cuts are 1,000 different things. But if you have people who don't have political literacy, who don't even want to participate in the process, and decide to live in places where everything is already taken care of for them, and then they claim that they want a voice, also, we're going to sabotage everything so that way nothing works for anyone. No, you're going to stay losing this battle and not truly participate. So it's so many Black people who's responsible for it. Not even just white conservatives, but like the white, but the Black rebel route crowd. You know, all these reparation rallies and all this kind of stuff with no signing up people to go vote, no participating in the process. Oh, I'm just gonna hold my vote. Oh, I'm gonna hold my nose and like hold your nose and do what? What do you want? An 8-1 Supreme Court? A 9-0 Supreme Court? Like, come on, man. Like there are fights that we can wage and fight that we're clearly not doing. And it's like, it's not even learning apathy. It's just flat out not interested. They completely outsource it to other people to give a damn about our issues, and it just don't work. I suggest y'all move to liberal areas that do work and don't even worry about these people participating in the process.
Well, the thing here is we played Marcel Dixon earlier, and he had an interview on Newsmax, I think it was. And the thing here is the attitude that he has is that I'm only going to govern on reparations if I get into office, and then I'm hang my hat up literally and go home. And you got to understand, trying to get into office, whether it's Congress or the Senate or any other branch of government, just for reparations is a losing proposition. You're not going to be able to just govern on that one social issue and then think that your job is done. It doesn't work like that. 100 bills come through the Senate and the House per year, and you're telling me that that's the only thing you're going to govern on. That's just not how it works. And so we got to root out folks, especially I see this more with Black men than I see with Black women. We got to start rooting out folks who think that they can monopolize, these talking points, and try to use it as collateral, to weigh in on conversations. And then, if we don't allow them to speak on it, then they think that we're hating on them. And it's like, we're not hating on you, just are completely uninformed as to what the topic of the day is. You need to read the room. You can't run on reparations because it's not Black people who are against reparations unless they consider themselves to be Black conservatives. I mean, ask Tim Scott, what's his position on reparations? He just said the other day, there's no such thing as systemic racism in his campaign pitch. Those sort of things, those are the sort of issues you're going to have to deal with if you think you're going to run for office.
And those side of people apparently claim that they're on. You have a pretty much an ahistorical dude that white people don't even trust.
Well, people like Tim Scott are trying to, speak to one very specific community per se to garner a large number of their votes. He's not trying to poll so massively heavy in the Black community. He's really trying to poll more heavily in the white community, and so therefore he starts we know from a racial perspective, if the breakdown, we see how most white folks feel about reparations now. Not all white folks feel that way, and we know a lot of universities and so forth don't feel that way either. But a lot of these white males and others, and these females too, who are not in the ruling classes, if you will, but feel like they've been stepped over. They're very much going to be against you. So reparations, to a large extent, is not very popular in the white community, and even amongst the more dominant percentage of them as well, as far as the upper part of the 10 to the 1%. Many of them are not in favor of you as well. But it's a battle that we have to fight, because certainly there's we've got a lot of evidence on our side. So let's push forward. But Tim Scott is certainly not going to support you, because he is not trying to gain a lot of support from the Black community. He's playing more towards the majority community that he feels he needs to cater to in his party, and certainly in his state.
Yeah, I mean, it's just at this point, things are so easy to figure out now. I mean, everything comes to your fingertips. I mean, you're walking around with a virtual supercomputer in your pocket. You can just ask ChatGPT questions about American history, and they'll write the reports for you to read. Still ain't getting it. Still not interested. It's like, it's just that you got to move without them. You got to move without them, and just disengage the conversation the moment they try to talk about politics. I just look at them like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Because they only say this stuff to get a rise out of people who are participating in the process, right? That's the only reason why they try to talk about politics around you, because they know you give a shit about it, and they don't care about it at all. So best thing to do is those people just moving to the side, participate, and to say anti-participatory, you just have to move in the other direction. Just don't bother even talking to them about it at all, period.
Well, so much of your politics is your economics, that's the bottom line. And a lot of us are just not dealing with it from that perspective. And the bullshitters, the people who don't have a bottom line, most of these Negroes you see walking around talking as crazy, they don't have a bottom line. I was trained many years ago as a kid by my father, a Superman in so many ways, a real brother. Never trust anyone that doesn't have a bottom line. They don't have a bottom line. They're trying to bullshit you. You can't really play with them. Talk to most of these guys. They have no bottom line here. If somebody's out here trying to take your land, somebody's out here trying to take your birthright, that's where you're at that point in time. You know what the bottom line is here. So you got to get with it.
Well, the only land that they have in the manosphere is StreamYard. So that's about the amount of land they're going to get.
Bravo land.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. Please hit the like button on the way out and share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black